Part 1, The City of Steel and Shadows. Out of the dark, soot-stained cabin leaped two security guards, their rifles raised, searching the smog-choked air. They never saw the shadow descending from the roof. With a heavy, metallic thud, Cloud Strife landed. In one fluid motion, he drew the massive buster sword strapped to his back, the broad blade catching the pale green glare of the Mako lamps. The guards fell before they could even scream. Behind Cloud, a massive man with a dark beard and a high-caliber Gatling gun where his right hand should be stepped onto the platform. This was Barrett Wallace, leader of the eco-terrorist group AVALANCHE. "Move it, Merc," Barrett barked, his voice like grinding gravel. "We ain't got all night. The planet's bleeding and Shinra's the one holding the knife." He didn't care about the planet or the scream of the life stream that Barrett insisted he could hear. He cared about the 2,000 gil he had been promised. He was an ex-soldier, an elite mercenary, and this was just another job. Following close behind them were Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, the core members of AVALANCHE. Jesse cracked the security codes on the heavy blast doors, her fingers flying across her portable terminal with practiced nervous energy. They slipped deeper into the belly of the No. 1 Mako reactor. The air grew thick and heavy, smelling of ozone and a sickeningly sweet chemical odor. Far below, the core pulsed with an eerie, hypnotic green light. It was Mako, the very lifeblood of the planet, sucked dry by the Shinra Electric Power Company to light the neon signs of the upper plate while leaving the slums below in permanent shadow. They reached the depths of the reactor core. Jesse handed Cloud the explosive charge. As Cloud stepped onto the narrow metal gangway to set the timer, his hand suddenly froze. The hum of the machinery faded, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in his ears. The green light of the Mako core flared violently, turning into an endless abyss of white. In his mind, a single black feather drifted down through the darkness. A deep, familiar voice whispered from the shadows of his consciousness. "Watch out. This isn't just a reactor. Cloud, hey, hotshot, wake up!" Barrett's roar shattered the hallucination. Cloud blinked, cold sweat dripping down his temple. He shook his head, his hand trembling slightly as he locked the bomb into place and primed the 10-minute timer. "We've got to go, now!" Jesse screamed as the reactor's red emergency klaxons began to wail. The security forces of Shinra had closed in. Armed sentries and attack dogs blocked the catwalks. Cloud took the lead, his buster sword cleaving through steel and armor, but the sheer volume of troops pressed them hard. As they reached the upper exit corridors, a blast doors slammed shut, separating Cloud from the rest of the group. "Go!" Cloud yelled over the deafening hiss of steam. "I'll find another way out." One reactor, tearing the steel structure apart in a spectacular cascade of green and orange fire. Cloud was thrown violently into the dark, chaotic alleys of Sector 8 as the world erupted in flame. Cloud fell. The sky above Midgar, a dizzying patchwork of steel plates, pipes, and distant neon lights, spun wildly. The wind roared in his ears as he plunged down, through the gaps between the upper plate and the suffocating darkness of the slums below. He closed his eyes, braced for the impact that would surely claim his life. Instead, he crashed through rotten wood and dusty tiles, falling through a vaulted ceiling. He landed with a heavy, bone-jarring thud, his vision fading to black. When Cloud opened his eyes, the harsh metallic stench of Midgar was gone. The air here was soft, carrying the sweet, forgotten scent of earth and damp vegetation. He lay on a bed of bright yellow flowers. Sunlight filtered through the smog, streamed through the gaping hole in the church's roof, illuminating a young woman kneeling beside him. She wore a pink dress, a red jacket, and had a long, braided brunette ponytail tied with a ribbon. In her hands she held a basket of delicate yellow blossoms. Her emerald green eyes were wide with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice light and musical. "You fell right out of the sky. I thought you were a Ganti or maybe an angel. Though you're carrying a very big sword for an angel." "I sell flowers here." Before they could speak further, the heavy wooden doors of the church creaked open. A tall man in a sharp, dark suit with wild red hair stepped inside, flanked by armed Shinra guards. It was Reno, an elite operative of the Turks, Shinra's covert security force. "Well, well," Reno drawled, tapping a metal rod against his palm. "We've been looking for you, Aerith. The president wants to have a little chat." "Don't make this difficult, okay?" She said she doesn't want to go. He parried their rifles, shattered their armor, and forced Reno to leap backward out of reach. Grabbing Aerith's hand, Cloud sprinted toward the back of the church. They climbed a rickety wooden ladder into the rafters, navigating the ancient, creaking wooden beams while dropping old barrels on the guards below. They escaped onto the rooftops of the slums, leaping from one rusted tin roof to another until the dark labyrinth of Sector 5 swallowed them. "Thanks, Cloud," Aerith panted, adjusting her basket. "You're a pretty good bodyguard." "How much do I owe you?" Aerith guided him through the winding, trash-strewn alleys of the slums, helping him navigate the confusing layout of the Undercity. After bidding her farewell near the edge of the sector, Cloud made his way back to the Sector 7 slums. There, nestled beneath the colossal shadow of the steel plate, was Seventh Heaven, a small, bustling bar. As Cloud pushed the door open, the bell chimed. Behind the counter stood Tifa Lockhart, his childhood friend from Nibelheim. Her dark eyes lit up with profound relief. "Cloud," she gasped, running around the counter and throwing her arms around him. "You're alive. We heard the reactor blew. We thought you were gone. Told you the Merc was too stubborn to die. We need him for the next mission. Shinra is hunting us and their security is tightening. Cloud, please stay for me." Memories of their childhood in Nibelheim, of a promise made under the cold, bright stars on a water tower, flickered in his mind. He had promised to protect her if she was ever in trouble. "Fine," Cloud muttered, leaning his sword against the wall. "I'll stay." Tifa's martial arts skills and Barrett's heavy firepower complemented Cloud's brutal swordplay. But as they bypassed the final security gate and stepped onto the high platform overlooking the pulsing green Mako of Reactor 5, the hum of the facility suddenly died. The green glow flickered, and a massive set of stadium lights flared to life, blinding them. "Ha ha ha! Welcome, fools!" A booming, obnoxious laugh echoed from the overhead speakers. Above them, on a high observation deck behind reinforced glass, stood Heidegger, the bloated, arrogant head of Shinra's public security. Beside him, leaning calmly against the railing, was President Shinra himself. The president looked down at them with cold, aristocratic disdain. "Avalanche," the president said, his voice smooth and devoid of mercy. "Did you truly believe you could operate in my city without my knowledge? You are nothing but insects, easily crushed. And you have outlived your usefulness as a distraction. Heidegger, activate the prototype." It was the Airbuster, a heavily armored combat mech bristling with missile launchers, lasers, and giant hydraulic claws. "Die!" Heidegger laughed. The Airbuster opened fire. Rockets slammed into the metal catwalks, sending plumes of fire and shrapnel into the air. Cloud leaped forward, his sword clashing against the mech's heavy steel plating, sparks showering the darkness. Tifa leaped from the railings, her fists striking the machine's joints with bone-shattering force, while Barrett unleashed a continuous, devastating barrage of bullets. The battle was frantic and brutal. The catwalks began to crumble under the intense heat and heavy explosions. With one final, desperate leap, Cloud drove the Buster's sword deep into the Airbuster's primary power core. The machine shrieked, its internal systems overloading. "Get back!" Cloud screamed. An instant later, the Airbuster exploded. The blast was colossal, tearing through the structural pillars of the reactor. The shockwave ripped the catwalks to shreds. Cloud was thrown through the air, his fingers slipping from a greasy metal pipe. As he plunged into the abyss, he looked up through the smoke. He saw Shinra tactical soldiers swarming the remaining platforms. Pinned down, injured, and overwhelmed by the sheer volume of troops, Tifa and Barrett were cornered and captured by Shinra's elite security. "Cloud," Tifa's desperate cry was the last thing he heard before the darkness rushed up to greet him, and for the second time he fell toward the Sector 5 slums. Once again, the yellow flowers of the Sector 5 church saved Cloud's life. He woke to find Aerith wiping his brow with a damp cloth. "You really need to find a better way of visiting me, Cloud," she said, her eyes twinkling with a mix of relief and gentle amusement. But there was no time for jokes. Cloud sat up, his body aching from the fall. "Tifa and Barret, they were captured. Shinra set a trap at Reactor 5. If we want to get back to Sector 7 to check on Marlene and Seventh Heaven, we have to go through Wall Market." As they slipped through the crowded, noisy streets, Cloud and Aerith gathered whispers from the local thugs. Tifa had not been taken to a Shinra prison. Realizing she was being transported through the Sector 6 border, she had managed to break her bonds and escape her captors. But instead of fleeing, she had deliberately entered Wall Market to seek information from Don Corneo, the grotesque crime lord who ruled the district. Corneo was known to have close ties to Shinra executives. "Corneo's mansion is heavily guarded," a local merchant told them. "He only lets women inside. Every night he chooses a new bride from the candidates brought to him." "I'm going in." An hour later, Cloud stood in the dim light of a boutique changing room, wearing a silk dress, a braided wig, and a light touch of makeup. Aerith clapped her hands in delight. "Oh, Cloud, you look beautiful." "Corneo won't know what hit him." There they found Tifa, who was shocked to see Cloud, and even more shocked by his attire. "Cloud, is that really you?" she whispered, trying to suppress a laugh despite the gravity of their situation. "Don't ask," Cloud muttered, adjusting his collar. They were led into Don Corneo's private chambers. The Don was a rotund, greasy man dressed in extravagant robes, lounging on a massive bed. But before he could make his choice, Cloud drew his buster sword, which he had concealed under his dress. Tifa and Aerith stood beside him, their expressions cold. "W.O., wait a minute," Corneo squealed, raising his hands in terror. "What is this?" "A setup." "Heidegger and the President. They're going to drop the plate, the Sector 7 plate. They're going to crush the whole slum, wipe out Avalanche, and blame it on you guys. Thousands of innocent people live there. Marlene, our friends. They want you for their crazy promised land project." The floor beneath their feet vanished. With a chorus of screams, Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith plummeted into the dark, filthy depths of the sewers below. The sewers were a nightmare of murky water, aggressive monsters, and crumbling brickwork. Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith fought their way through the subterranean darkness, their hearts pounding with a terrifying sense of urgency. They burst out into the train graveyard, a labyrinth of rusted, abandoned locomotives covered in thick fog and haunted by restless spirits. By the time they reached the Sector 7 slums, the air was already thick with the smell of smoke and burning oil. A massive battle was raging at the central support pillar. Shinra helicopters buzzed in the smog-choked sky like mechanical hornets. Armed soldiers were everywhere, firing upward at the pillar. "Barret!" Tifa screamed, running toward the base of the massive steel column. Barret had managed to escape his captors, his fury and raw strength allowing him to break out of a transport vehicle. Now he was fighting like a man possessed, his Gatling gun glowing red-hot as he held off waves of Shinra troops. But the cost was already devastating. On the lower platforms of the pillar lay Wedge, Biggs, and Jesse. They had fought bravely to defend the emergency console, but their bodies were broken by gunfire and shrapnel. "Cloud, Tifa," Jesse whispered, her hand weakly reaching out as Tifa knelt beside her, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry." "We couldn't stop them." Her eyes fluttered shut, her hand falling cold and limp. High above, near the self-destruct console, Reno and Rude of the Turks were entering the final activation codes. "It's over, kids," Reno called down, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "Nothing personal, just orders." She had gone to find Marlene, securing the child's safety by sending her to her adoptive mother, Elmira. But in doing so, Aerith had allowed herself to be captured by Tseng to buy Marlene time to escape. Aerith, Cloud yelled, running toward the helicopter, but it was too late. "We have what we came for," Tseng said coldly through a megaphone. "Activate the release, Reno." The emergency locks on the massive pillar disengaged with a sound like thunder. The steel cables snapped, whipping through the air and tearing the structures apart. The colossal plate of Sector 7 began to groan, tilting violently as millions of tons of steel and concrete prepared to collapse. "Cloud, we have to go," Barrett screamed, grabbing Tifa, who was weeping over Jessie's body. Cloud grabbed them both, leaping onto a wire-guided cable as the world collapsed around them. They swung wildly into the adjacent sector just as Sector 7 fell. The noise was deafening, a cataclysmic roar that shook the very foundations of Midgar. The sky fell. Sector 7 was crushed into oblivion, burying the slums, the seventh heaven bar, and all of Avalanche's dreams under a mountain of smoking, twisted metal. In the quiet, ash-filled aftermath, Barrett fell to his knees, punching the ground until his knuckles bled. "Jessie, Biggs, Wedge, no." Cloud stood over them, his eyes dark with a cold, burning fury. He looked at the ruined sky. "Marlene is safe," Cloud said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Aerith got her to Elmira's house in Sector 5 before they took her. Shinra has Aerith. They're keeping her in the Shinra building. We tear it down brick by brick, and we get her back." It was the heart of the corporate beast, guarded by cutting-edge security systems and elite military units. Using grappling hooks, Cloud, Tifa, and Barrett scaled the massive plate ruins, bypassing the heavily guarded lower perimeters. They broke through a ventilation shaft on the upper floors, slipping into the pristine, clinical corridors of the tower. As they searched the upper floors for Aerith's holding cell, they reached the research laboratories of Professor Hojo, the head of Shinra's science department. The labs were a chamber of horrors, filled with strange specimens suspended in glowing green tubes. In the center of the main laboratory, they found a majestic, red-furred, beast-like creature trapped in a heavy glass stasis chamber. It had a flaming tail and wise, ancient eyes. Beside the chamber stood Professor Hojo himself, a frail, hunched man with a sickening, self-satisfied smirk. "Fascinating," Hojo muttered, tapping on the glass. "The last of its kind. A perfect specimen to breed with the Cetra female. We shall preserve the line of the ancients, and they will lead us to the promised land." The glass chamber shattered. The red beast leaped out, landing gracefully on the laboratory floor. It snarled, but instead of attacking the party, it lunged at Hojo's assistants, scattering them in terror. "I am Red XIII," the beast spoke, its voice deep, articulate, and surprisingly cultured. "I owe you my gratitude. Let us free the Cetra woman and leave this wretched place." "Thank you, Cloud," Aerith whispered. "I knew you'd come." A thick, icy fog began to roll through the corridors. Following a strange sensation, Cloud led the group to a restricted, high-security vault deep within the laboratory. Inside, they found a massive, shattered tank. Red liquid dripped from the broken glass. A brass plaque on the pedestal read, "Jenova." The tank was empty. The ancient, headless extraterrestrial organism that Shinra had kept under lock and key for decades was gone. Cloud stared at the shattered glass, his mind suddenly screaming with a violent, agonizing pain. He saw a shadow, a long silver hair, and a pair of cold, cat-like green eyes laughing in the dark. The silence inside the Shinra building was absolute. The sirens had stopped. The automated security bots sat motionless in the corridors. Cloud led the party up the winding staircases toward the top floors. The smell of copper and rot hung thick in the air. As they reached the 70th floor, they saw a trail of dark, thick blood smeared across the pristine white carpets. They pushed open the heavy double doors of the president's office. President Shinra sat slumped over his massive mahogany desk. He was dead, impaled through the back of his chair, and directly through his chest was a legendary, impossibly long sword. The Masamune. Cloud froze, his breath catching in his throat. "It can't be." "What is it?" Tifa asked, her hand trembling as she looked at the dead president. "The Masamune," Cloud whispered, his voice shaking with a rare, genuine terror. Only one man can wield that sword, Sephiroth. The legendary soldier, but he's been dead for 5 years. He took Jenova. This was Rufus Shinra, the president's ruthless, cold-hearted son. Well, well, Rufus said, looking at his father's corpse with a chilling lack of emotion. It seems my father has finally retired. Which makes me the president of the Shinra Electric Power Company. As my first official act, I think I'll have you all executed. I'll handle Rufus. The battle was intense, the wind howling around them, but Cloud's raw fury drove Rufus back. Rufus escaped in a Shinra helicopter, leaving Cloud to sprint down to the garage. Below, the party had secured a heavy Shinra transport truck and a sleek experimental motorcycle, the Hardy Daytona. Cloud vaulted onto the motorcycle, revving the powerful engine. Tifa, Barret, Aerith, and Red XIII piled into the back of the heavy truck. "Hang on!" Cloud shouted. They roared out of the garage, bursting through the glass facade of the Shinra building in a shower of glittering shards. They raced down the winding, unfinished Midgar highway, with Shinra pursuers on bikes and in armored cars giving chase. Cloud wove through the enemy lines, his buster sword slicing through tires and armor, while Barret provided covering fire from the truck's bed. With one final, desperate jump, they cleared the highway barricades, crashing through the outer gates of the metropolis. The motorcycle and the truck slid to a halt on a grassy hillside. For the first time in their lives, they looked back at Midgar from the outside. The massive city looked like a giant metallic beast, its Mako reactors glowing green against the dark night sky. They had escaped the steel cage. The world lay before them, vast, wild, and full of unknown dangers. Part 2, The Journey Beyond. They sought temporary refuge in the quiet, peaceful town of Calm, a charming settlement of stone houses and windmills. At the local inn, they gathered in a quiet upstairs room. Barret paced the floor, his gun arm twitching. "All right, Strife. You said Sephiroth is alive. You said he killed the president and took that. Jenova thing. Who the hell is Sephiroth and why are we chasing him?" Sephiroth and I were sent to my hometown of Nibelheim. He was the greatest soldier first-class Shinra had ever produced. A hero. I was just a young recruit, proud to be working alongside him. Tifa was our guide. When we reached the reactor deep in the heart of the mountain, Sephiroth found a sealed chamber. Above the door was a name, Jenova. Inside, we saw a horrific biological monstrosity sealed in a tank of concentrated Mako. Sephiroth stared at it. He realized he was different. He knew Hojo and Professor Gast had conducted experiments on him before his birth, injecting him with Jenova's cells. His mind, it fractured. He concluded that Jenova was a Cetra, an ancient, and that he was her son. He believed humanity had betrayed the Cetra, stealing the planet from its rightful rulers. He burned Nibelheim to the ground. I remember the fire, the screams. He killed everyone, my mother, Tifa's father. I followed him to the reactor, Cloud continued. Tifa was already there, wounded. Sephiroth had decapitated Jenova, intending to take her head and reclaim the planet. I confronted him. I don't remember how, but I managed to defeat him. I thought he was dead. I thought he had fallen into the life stream below the reactor. But her memory of the young man who had saved her, who had worn the proud blue uniform of a soldier, it didn't align with the story Cloud was telling. Yet seeing Cloud's fragile state, she kept her silence, afraid of what might happen if she shattered his fragile grip on reality. "Sephiroth is seeking the Black Materia," Cloud said, his eyes hardening. "He wants to destroy the planet or become a god. We have to stop him." "We can't cross that on foot," Red XIII warned, his ears twitching. "The Midgar Zalem lives in those waters. It is a colossal serpent, ancient and hungry. It will swallow us whole." The young farm boy, Choco Billy, showed them how to capture and ride the swift, giant birds. "Chocobos are fast enough to outrun the Zalem," he explained. "Just hold onto the reins and don't look back." Halfway across, a shadow rose from the dark water. A colossal, scaled serpent with glowing red eyes lunged at them. The Chocobos squealed, putting on a burst of incredible speed, narrowly evading the creature's snapping jaws as they scrambled onto the rocky shore on the other side. As they dismounted, they gasped. Ahead of them at the entrance to the mithril mine lay a massive, dead Midgar Zolom. It was not just dead. It had been impaled effortlessly on a giant, splintered tree trunk, its blood dripping into the swamp. "Sephiroth," Cloud whispered, staring at the gruesome sight. "He did this, alone, without even breaking a sweat." They entered the dark, winding tunnels of the mithril mine. As they navigated the damp caverns, they heard voices ahead. Slipping behind a pile of crates, they saw the Turks once again. Reno and Rude were there, alongside a new recruit, a sharp-tongued young woman named Elena. "Sephiroth is heading to Junon," Elena was saying, her voice echoing in the cave. "He's planning to get a ship to cross the ocean to the western continent. We have to secure the port." A brief, chaotic skirmish ensued, but the Turks, realizing they were outnumbered, retreated deeper into the mine, leaving Cloud and his friends with a clear objective. They had to reach Junon before Sephiroth could escape. Junon was a colossal, heavily fortified military port city, dominated by the Sister Ray, a giant Mako cannon designed to defend the city from threats across the sea. To enter the upper city where the docks were located, the party had to bypass heavy military checkpoints. "I have an idea," Tifa said. "Shinra is preparing for President Rufus's grand inauguration parade. The city is flooded with soldiers. If Cloud can steal a uniform, he can blend right in." He was immediately swept up by a frantic drill sergeant, who shoved a rifle into his hands and pushed him into the parade formation. Cloud marched through the streets of Junon, performing highly choreographed drills under the watchful eyes of Rufus Shinra and Heidegger on the high balconies. "Keep those knees up, soldier," the sergeant screamed in Cloud's ear. While Rufus was occupied with the parade, and his entourage prepared to board the massive military cargo ship, Tifa, Barrett, Aerith, and Red XIII managed to slip past the distracted guards, stowing away in the ship's lower cargo hold. Cloud quickly abandoned his uniform, slipping onto the ship just as the massive steel doors sealed shut, and the vessel began its journey across the ocean. Midway across the sea, a sudden, chilling silence fell over the ship. The hum of the engines was drowned out by the sound of screams from the upper decks. Cloud drew his buster sword, leading the group out of the cargo hold. The scene on the main deck was horrific. Dozens of Shinra soldiers lay dead, their bodies torn apart by precise, clean cuts. The air was freezing, and a thick, dark mist clung to the wood. At the bow of the ship stood a tall figure with long, silver hair, dressed in a dark coat. He turned slowly, his cat-like green eyes shining with a cold, supernatural light. "Sephiroth?" Cloud gasped, his heart pounding in his chest. Sephiroth looked at Cloud, his expression blank, devoid of any human emotion. "The time is near," he murmured, his voice like the whispering wind. "The reunion, Jenova shall reclaim her world." He vanished into a swirl of black feathers, leaving behind a pulsing, writhing mass of purple biological tissue. The tissue expanded rapidly, growing limbs, tentacles, and a weeping, eyeless face. It was Jenova birth, a horrific fragment of the ancient alien organism. "Get back!" Barrett yelled, his Gatling gun spinning to life. The monstrosity shrieked, unleashing blasts of raw Mako energy and slamming its heavy tentacles against the deck. The battle was a desperate struggle for survival on the rain-slicked ship. Tifa dodged the sweeping tentacles, striking the core of the creature, while Aerith used her magic to shield the party from the toxic Mako fumes. With a final, roaring strike, Cloud drove his buster sword through the heart of the beast. The creature melted into a puddle of dark, foul liquid, leaving behind only a piece of dead, gray flesh. Cloud stood panting, his hand trembling as he wiped the sweat and black blood from his face. He looked out over the endless, dark ocean. Sephiroth was ahead of them, his power growing, his intentions more terrifying than anything they had ever faced. But as the sun began to break through the dark clouds, revealing the distant shores of Costa del Sol, Cloud knew there was no turning back. They were bound to this hunt, and they would follow Sephiroth to the very ends of the earth. Part 3, Sands, Stars, and Broken Dreams. The port resort was a sprawling oasis of sun-drenched beaches, white stone villas, and palm trees, a surreal contrast to the metallic prison of Midgar they had left behind. While the others tried to rest, Cloud spotted a familiar, eccentric figure lounging beneath a parasol on the sand. It was Professor Hojo, dressed in a swimsuit but still wearing his cold, analytical lab coat. He barely looked up as Cloud approached, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Ah, the failed specimen," Hojo murmured, a chilling sneer in his voice. "If you are looking for Sephiroth, you are too late. He has already departed, heading south. He follows the call of the reunion. You would do well to keep moving, if only to provide more interesting data." Here the beautiful resort faded, replaced by a desolate landscape of dead trees and abandoned coal tracks. The weight of this place hung heavily on Barrett. His jaw was set, his dark eyes staring at the rusted tracks of the MT, Coral Railway. "This is my home," Barrett said, his voice unusually quiet, stripped of its usual bravado. "Or what's left of it. Me and my best friend Dine, we used to run this town. It was a coal town, dirty but honest. Then Shinra came. They promised us a Mako reactor. They said it would bring wealth, a better life. Dine didn't want it, but I convinced him. I trusted them. Their soldiers came and burned Coral to the ground. They slaughtered everyone. My wife, Mina, Dine's wife, gone. Me and Dine, we tried to escape, but we got pinned down at the edge of a cliff. A Shinra executive named Scarlet. She ordered her men to fire. A bullet took my arm, another took Dine's. We fell into the gorge. I thought he was dead." Beneath the amusement park lay the desert prison, a lawless wasteland of shifting sands where Shinra dumped its worst criminals. Deep within the dusty, scrap metal corridors of the prison, they found Dine. But he was no longer the man Barrett remembered. His right arm had been replaced with a crudely grafted machine gun, similar to Barrett's own. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and consumed by madness. "Dine!" Barrett cried, stepping forward. "You're alive." "Even Marlene. She mustn't see what I've become. I've spilled too much blood, Barrett. The sand is stained with it. Only one of us gets to carry her memory." He looked up at the artificial sky of the gold saucer above them. Take care of her, Barrett," Dine whispered, his voice cracking. "Eleanor. I'm coming home." To escape the desert prison, the party had to ascend into the glittering, surreal heart of the gold saucer, a massive, floating amusement park built atop the ruins of the Coral Desert. It was a dizzying wonderland of neon lights, roller coasters, and arcade halls, a place where people came to drown their despair in artificial dreams. As they searched for a way out, they were approached by a bizarre creature, a small, toy white cat wearing a crown riding atop a giant, plump mog. "Greetings, travelers," the cat announced, bowing dramatically. "I am Kate Sith. A fortune teller of some renown. Let me read your future. Oh dear, what a strange fortune. What you seek will be yours, but you will lose something dear. Fascinating, I must join you. I simply must." To win their freedom from the prison below, Dio demanded that Cloud participate in a dangerous Chocobo race. Cloud mounted a swift black bird, navigating the treacherous, high-speed tracks against the park's best riders. He won, securing their pardon, but as he stepped off the saddle, a sudden, blinding pain struck his head. The neon lights of the arena spun. The green Mako in his blood surged, reacting violently to a distant, unseen force. Cloud collapsed, unconscious, as the concerned cries of Tifa and Aerith faded into blackness. While Cloud recovered in a quiet room, Aerith and Tifa stood on the balcony outside, looking out over the glittering amusement park. "He's carrying a heavy burden, isn't he?" Aerith said softly, her eyes reflecting the colorful neon lights. "He tries to act so cold, so independent, but he's fragile. Like he's trying to hold a broken mirror together. There are things he remembers that don't make sense. I'm afraid of what will happen if the truth comes out." Together, following him, Cloud, who had just awakened, and the others watched in horror as the toy cat handed the keystone, an ancient artifact needed to enter the Temple of the Ancients, directly to Tseng of the Turks, who escaped in a Shinra helicopter. "Why, Kate Sith?" Tifa gasped, her voice laced with betrayal. Kate Sith turned, his cheerful robotic eyes suddenly looking very old and tired. "I'm sorry, folks, I really am. I'm a spy for Shinra. My movements are controlled remotely by a man named Reeve, an executive in Midgar. But you have to believe me, I don't want to see the planet destroyed either. I had no choice, but I'll help you get it back. I promise." In a small, modest cottage at the edge of the village, they met an elderly couple. "Are you travelers?" the old woman asked, her eyes searching their faces. Have you ever met a boy named Zack Fair? He joined Soldier First Class years ago, but we haven't heard from him in 5 years. We're so worried." Zack had been her first love, the man who had suddenly disappeared from her life without a trace. Cloud, too, felt a strange, violent headache ripple through his mind at the mention of the name, but he could not grasp the memory. They left Gongaga behind, traveling across the red, dusty canyons until they reached Cosmo Canyon, a majestic sanctuary carved into the high stone cliffs, dedicated to the study of planetology. This was the birthplace of Red Xii, whose true name was Nanaki. "Welcome home, Nanaki," a warm, ancient voice called out. An old, bearded man floating on a mechanical sphere descended to greet them. This was Bugenhagen, Nanaki's grandfather and the elder of the canyon. Bugenhagen led the party to his observatory, where a massive, holographic projection of the cosmos spun in the darkness. He spoke of the life stream, the golden, glowing river of spiritual energy that flowed beneath the crust of the planet. "The planet is a living organism," Bugenhagen explained, his voice echoing with profound wisdom. "When a creature dies, its life energy returns to the life stream, carrying its memories and experiences with it. This energy is what gives birth to new life. But Shinra, they are draining this blood, condensing it into Mako. They are freezing the flow of life. If the life stream dries up, the planet will die. When the Gi tribe attacked our canyon years ago, he abandoned his post and fled, leaving my mother and me to face them. It is time you learned the truth." At the end of the dark, stone corridor, they emerged onto a high cliff overlooking the canyon. There stood a massive stone statue of a great warrior beast, its chest bristling with petrified arrows. It was Sido. "Your father did not run Nanaki," Bugenhagen said softly. "The Gi tribe sought to enter the canyon through this secret pass. Sido stood here alone, fighting off hundreds of them. He was struck by their poisoned arrows, which slowly turned his body to stone. But even as he crystallized, he did not retreat. He saved us all." He threw his head back, unleashing a long, mournful howl that echoed across the canyon. The stone statue of Sido seemed to glisten, a single drop of water falling from its stone eye. "I am Nanaki, son of Sido," the beast declared, his voice filled with pride. "I will protect this planet, just as my father did." The wooden houses, the water tower, the shops, everything was exactly as it had been before the fire. This is impossible," Cloud muttered, his eyes wide with horror as he ran through the streets. "I saw it burn. I saw the flames." "You must be mistaken. They hired these people to pretend nothing ever happened." They searched the dusty, shadow-filled rooms, eventually finding a hidden spiral staircase that led deep into the subterranean caverns. In the dark basement, surrounded by old laboratory equipment and chains, they found a heavy iron coffin. Cloud cautiously pushed the lid aside. A man dressed in a tattered red cloak and black leather boots sat up. He had pale skin, long dark hair, and a cold, piercing gaze. His left arm was encased in a golden claw. This was Vincent Valentine, a former member of the Turks who had been experimented on by Professor Hoge and locked away in this dark tomb for 30 years. "Who disturbs my slumber?" Vincent asked, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 regrets. "We're looking for Sephiroth," Cloud said. At the mention of Sephiroth, Vincent's eyes flared with a sudden, tragic intensity. Sephiroth, the child of Lucretia, I loved her, but I could not save her from Hojo's madness. She was used as an experiment, her child injected with Jenova's cells before birth. I was weak. I allowed it to happen. This sleep is my penance. If you seek Sephiroth, and if you seek vengeance on Hojo, then my gun is yours. I will sleep no longer. The documents confirmed the horrific truth. Cloud's memories of the incident were fractured, and his own name was listed in the records as a test subject of Hojo's horrific reunion theory. They pursued Sephiroth north, reaching Rocket Town, a small settlement built around a massive, tilted space rocket known as Shinra No. 26. The rocket sat rusting in its launch pad, a monument to a forgotten dream. Here they met Sid Highwind, a bitter, chain-smoking former astronaut. He wore a flight jacket, goggles, and carried a spear. "Shinra," Sid spat, puffing on his cigarette. "They took my dream and threw it in the dirt. Years ago, I was supposed to be the first man in space. But during the launch sequence, my assistant, Shira, discovered a fuel leak in the engine. She refused to leave the launch pad. If I had pressed the button, she would have been vaporized. So I shut it down. The launch was aborted, and Shinra canceled the space program the next day to save money. I've been stuck here ever since, staring at this useless piece of tin. That plane is mine." The plane lost altitude, crashing into the ocean with a spectacular splash. Though the tiny Bronco could no longer fly high, its wings acted as a perfect pontoon, allowing them to skim across the shallow waters of the ocean, bypassing Shinra's coastal blockades and giving them a new, swift method of travel. Aerith's connection to the lifestream grew stronger with every passing day. Guided by her ancestral whispers, they navigated the tiny Bronco to the Temple of the Ancients, a massive, stone pyramid hidden deep within a dense, primordial jungle. Inside, the physical laws of the world seemed to warp. The corridors were a dizzying maze of gravity-defying staircases, floating platforms, and ancient, glowing murals. At the heart of the temple, they confronted Sephiroth. He stood before a massive mural depicting a meteor striking the planet. "The Black Materia," Sephiroth said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "It is the key to summoning Meteor, the ultimate destructive magic. When Meteor strikes, the planet will open a massive wound. To heal this wound, all the Mako, all the life stream will gather in one place, and I shall stand at the center of that wound, absorbing all the life energy of the planet. I shall become a god. The temple itself is the materia. To compress it into a usable form, someone must solve the puzzle at the center, but doing so will collapse the temple, crushing whoever remains inside." "I'll do it," Kate Sith's voice broke the heavy silence. The toy cat stepped forward, his mechanical ears drooping slightly. "I'm just a toy, folks. If this body is crushed, Reeve can just build me a new one, but I want to do this. I want to show you that even a spy can do the right thing." The walls collapsed inward. As the temple disintegrated, a small, black, diamond-shaped gemstone fell onto the altar. It was the Black Materia. An instant later, a brand-new Kate Sith model bounced out from behind a nearby rock. "Hey there. Kate Sith number 2 is on the job. Did you miss me?" Under Sephiroth's absolute mental control, Cloud picked up the Black Materia and walked toward the shadows, handing the ultimate weapon of destruction directly to his nemesis. Devastated by his actions and terrified of the dark power Sephiroth held over his mind, Cloud fell into a deep, feverish sleep. When he awoke, Aerith was gone. "She left a message," Tifa said, her voice trembling as she held a small, crumpled note. "She said she is the only one who can stop him. She's gone to the Forgotten Capital, the city of the Ancients. She's going to pray for Holy, the only thing that can counter Meteor." They traveled north, crossing the frozen wastes until they reached the Forgotten Capital, a breathtaking, ancient city built of glowing, iridescent shells and crystal structures. They found Aerith in the center of a massive, water-filled temple. She was kneeling on a stone altar, her hands clasped in deep prayer. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful. Around her, a faint, pale green light began to glow, and a small, white sphere of materia slipped from her hair, bouncing softly onto the stone floor. Cloud stepped forward, his boots splashing in the shallow water. Aerith. Cloud's world shattered into absolute, deafening silence. He watched in slow motion as Sephiroth pulled the sword free. Aerith's body slumped forward, her emerald green eyes losing their light as she fell onto the cold stone altar. The white materia wholly slipped into the deep water, sinking into the dark depths with a soft, green glow. "Sephiroth!" Cloud screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. Sephiroth looked at him, a cold, mocking smile on his lips. "Do not pretend to feel sadness, Cloud. You are nothing but a puppet, and a puppet has no feelings." They defeated the monster in a frenzy of rage and grief, but the victory was hollow. Cloud knelt in the water, cradling Aerith's lifeless body in his arms. Her face was peaceful, as if she were only sleeping. "Aerith is gone," Cloud whispered, his voice cracking as tears fell onto her pale cheek. "She will no longer talk, laugh, cry, or get angry. What about us?" "What are we supposed to do?" They watched in silent grief as the last daughter of the Cetra sank into the glowing embrace of the lifestream, her prayer for the planet completed in death. The grief that hung over the party was suffocating. But beneath the sorrow, a burning, desperate resolve began to take root. "She did her part," Barrett said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "She summoned Holy. It's up to us to make sure Sephiroth doesn't block it. We have to get that Black Materia back and stop him before he can summon Meteor. The barrier around the northern crater is impenetrable. We follow him to the end of the world." Using their specialized digging equipment, they uncovered the lunar harp, an ancient musical instrument whose magical tones could awaken the sleeping forest to the north, clearing a path through the frozen mountain passes. As they prepared to ascend into the freezing wastes, Cloud looked back at the southern horizon. He felt a strange, cold pull in his chest, an invisible thread drawing him toward Sephiroth. He knew his mind was not entirely his own. But for Aerith, and for the survival of the planet, he would march into the very mouth of hell. The journey north brought them to Icicle Inn, a quiet, snow-covered resort village nestled at the base of the massive Gia's cliff. In an abandoned, snow-drifted laboratory at the edge of the village, they found a series of old videotapes recorded decades ago by Professor Gast, Aerith's father, and Ifalna, Aerith's Cetra mother. Cloud pressed play on the ancient monitor. The screen flickered to life, showing a kind, bearded man and a beautiful, dark-haired woman holding a baby girl with bright green eyes. "This is Aerith," Professor Gast's voice echoed through the cold room. "Ifalna has been telling me of the crisis from the sky that occurred 2,000 years ago. It was an alien parasite that crashed onto our planet inside a meteor. It can change its form, mimicking those we love, infecting them with a virus that drives them mad. It decimated our people. The Cetra managed to seal it away. But Shinra mistook it for one of us. Sephiroth is not an ancient, he is the host of a monster." The wind howled, a deafening white roar that threatened to freeze them solid. They navigated the shifting ice floes, climbing frozen cliffs and surviving a massive, roaring avalanche that buried the valley in millions of tons of snow. They pushed forward, driven by a desperate, burning heat that the freezing wind could not extinguish. They climbed Gia's cliff, emerging onto the high, jagged rim of the northern crater, the massive wound in the planet's surface where Jenova had crashed 2,000 years ago. Below them lay the whirlwind maze, a surreal, twisting labyrinth of crystalline ice, dark stone, and roaring tornadoes of pure, raw Mako energy. Here, the lifestream bled into the sky, creating a dizzying display of green and white light. As they descended into the maze, they encountered a horrifying sight. Dozens of men and women dressed in black robes, crawling toward the center of the crater like insects. They were Sephiroth's clones, failed test subjects of Hojo's Jenova experiments, drawn here by the irresistible call of the reunion. Sephiroth stood at the center of the maze, waiting for them. "Welcome, Cloud," Sephiroth said, his voice echoing in Cloud's mind like a physical blow. The time has come. The reunion is complete. Cloud saw Nibelheim 5 years ago, but the man in the soldier uniform with the Buster sword was not Cloud. It was a young man with black hair and a confident, friendly smile. "Zack," Tifa gasped, her voice filled with horror as she looked at the illusion. Who is that?" Cloud screamed, clutching his head as his mind began to fracture, his memories spinning out of control. "No, I was there. I was in Soldier. I was Sephiroth's partner. Hojo created you in a laboratory after the fire, using Jenova's cells to construct a false persona based on Zack's memories and Tifa's desires. You are nothing but a puppet, Cloud, a puppet with no past and no future." The fragile mirror of his identity shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. He fell to his knees, his eyes blank, his voice hollow. I am not Cloud," he whispered. Under Sephiroth's absolute hypnotic command, Cloud stood up. He walked toward the altar where the Black Materia lay. Tifa screamed, trying to reach him, but the violent wind of the whirlwind mazed through her back. Cloud picked up the Black Materia. With a vacant, terrifying smile, he handed it directly to Sephiroth. The sky erupted. A blinding column of red and black energy shot into the heavens. The ground shook with a cataclysmic earthquake as the Black Materia was activated. Above them in the dark, swirling clouds, a massive, burning red star appeared, growing larger and more terrifying with every passing second. Meteor had been summoned. The planet began to die. Part 4, The Gathering Storm. When Barret and Tifa finally opened their eyes, they did not find the comforting blue of the sky. Instead, a colossal, burning red star hung suspended in the heavens, choked by dark, swirling clouds. Meteor was coming, getting closer with every passing second, casting a sickening, bloody light over the world. But the planet did not suffer in silence. Sensing its impending doom, the ancient world had activated its final, terrifying defense mechanism. From the deepest, darkest trenches of the oceans and the burning abysses of the earth, prehistoric titans awakened. They were the weapons, colossal, biomechanical monsters of immense power, engineered by the planet itself to destroy anything and everything that posed a threat to its survival. Diamond, Ultimate, Sapphire, Ruby, and Emerald weapon rose from their slumbers, their monstrous forms casting long shadows over the lands. Blinded by primeval instinct, they saw humanity's Mako-draining cities as the ultimate threat, launching devastating attacks against Shinra facilities across the globe. In the chaos, Tifa and Barret found themselves stripped of their weapons, shackled in the high-security military port of Junon. Heidegger and Scarlet, desperate to find scapegoats for the impending apocalypse, had sentenced them to public execution by gas chamber. "You brought this upon us?" Scarlet sneered, her heels clicking against the cold steel floor of the execution room as she adjusted the valves of the gas chamber. "You and your pathetic little cell. You will die first, and then we will destroy these beasts with our Mako cannon." "Look at the sky." It slammed its massive claws into the steel foundations of the port city, triggering a series of cataclysmic explosions that ripped through the military base. Alarms wailed. The execution chamber buckled, the glass cracking as the floor tilted violently. In the panic, Tifa managed to slip her bonds, kicking her way out of the chamber as Sapphire weapon unleashed a blinding beam of energy that tore the execution tower in two. Reuniting in the smoking ruins, Barret, Tifa, and the others escaped aboard the Highwind, a massive, double-decked Shinra airship they managed to commandeer from the chaotic docks. But their escape was hollow. Cloud was still missing, swallowed by the lifestream at the northern crater, and the world was tearing itself apart. The Highwind soared through the crimson, ash-filled skies, searching for any sign of their lost leader. Acting on a tip from local merchants, they turned the airship south, landing on the remote, tropical island of Midgar, a quiet settlement built over a massive, boiling hot spring where the lifestream was known to bubble close to the surface. There in a small, sterile clinic, Tifa found him. Cloud sat in a wooden wheelchair, staring blankly at the wall. His skin was pale, his eyes wide and vacant, completely devoid of the sharp blue light that had once defined him. He was suffering from a severe case of Mako poisoning. His mind shattered by the overwhelming flood of spiritual energy he had absorbed when he fell into the life stream at the northern crater. He was entirely unresponsive, his lips moving silently as he muttered incoherent, broken fragments of memories that did not belong to him. "Cloud," Tifa whispered, kneeling beside his chair and taking his limp, cold hand in her own. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the hollow shell of her childhood friend. "What did they do to you?" "I'm staying here," she told the others, her voice resolute despite her grief. "I can't leave him like this. I have to help him find his way back." Barrett looked at Sid Highwind, who was leaning against the wall of the clinic, puffing furiously on a cigarette. "Well, Sid," Barrett grunted, "you're the captain of the ship. What's the play?" "Shinra is trying to fight the weapons with their new Mako cannon, the Sister Ray, but they're going to get themselves killed. We need to gather our strength, find a way to stop Sephiroth, and keep these giant monsters from stamping us into grease. Let's move." Ultimate Weapon, a soaring predator of obsidian stone and burning purple energy, had spotted the town, its massive wings beating the air into a frenzy. The attack on Midgar was sudden and catastrophic. Ultimate Weapon descended from the red clouds, slamming into the cliffs surrounding the hot springs. The earth groaned, the boiling water of the life stream erupting in massive geysers as a violent earthquake tore the island apart. Tifa desperately tried to wheel Cloud to safety, but the ground beneath the clinic buckled. A massive fissure opened, swallowing the building and everything around it. With a terrified cry, Tifa fell into the abyss, dragged down into the glowing, swirling river of pure, concentrated life stream bubbling beneath the island. Cloud's wheelchair tumbled after her, both of them vanishing into the brilliant, emerald green light. Inside the life stream, physical reality dissolved. Tifa opened her eyes to find herself floating in a vast, weightless sea of glowing energy. Around her, fragments of memories, bright, shimmering spheres of light, drifted like stars in the dark. In the center of this cosmic space sat Cloud, his form split into 3 distinct, ghostly projections. He was weeping, his hands clutching his head as the conflicting memories tore him apart. "Cloud," Tifa called out, her voice echoing through the spiritual silence. "You have to listen to me. We have to find the truth together. Don't let Sephiroth's lies consume you." "Look, Cloud," Tifa said, pointing to the young man in the soldier uniform who was running toward the Mako reactor. "Who is that?" "I was a soldier first class." "Zack," Cloud whispered, his voice trembling as the memory began to realign. He was my friend. We were on the mission together." They saw Sephiroth standing over Tifa's wounded body, his mass-immune dripping with blood. Zack ran into the chamber, drawing his sword to fight the legendary hero, only to be brutally defeated. Then a young Shinra infantryman, his face concealed beneath a standard-issue helmet, stumbled into the reactor. He saw Tifa bleeding on the floor. Filled with a desperate, frantic rage, the young soldier picked up Zack's fallen Buster sword, running Sephiroth through from behind while his back was turned. The soldier took off his helmet, revealing spiky blonde hair and eyes that did not yet glow with Mako. "It was me," Cloud gasped, his 3 projections merging into a single, whole spirit as the tears fell freely. "I was the infantryman. I was too ashamed to show my face because I hadn't made it into soldier. I had promised you I'd protect you, Tifa, but I felt like a failure." After the fire, Professor Hojo had captured both Zack and the wounded Cloud, keeping them in liquid stasis chambers in the Shinra Mansion basement for 4 years, injecting them with Jenova cells to test his reunion theory. Zack, whose body was already adapted to Mako, managed to break them out. On the way to Midgar, Shinra troops killed Zack, and Zack gave his Buster sword to Cloud. Cloud, poisoned and mentally broken, constructed a false persona based on Zack's stories and Tifa's idealized memory of him. "Thank you, Tifa," Cloud said, his eyes finally clearing, shining with a genuine, gentle warmth. "I know who I am now. I'm Cloud Strife, and I have to finish this." But as Cloud stood up, pushing his wet blonde hair back, they saw the change immediately. The vacant, hollow stare was gone. His eyes were focused, sharp, and filled with a quiet, solid resolve. "Cloud!" Barrett laughed, a booming sound of joy. "You're back, you're really back." The boy she had known on the water tower in Nibelheim had finally returned to her, whole and unbroken. Retaking leadership of the party, Cloud gathered them aboard the Highwind. "We have a problem," he explained, pointing to a map of the world. "Sephiroth has formed a massive, glowing barrier of energy around the northern crater. No airship, no weapon, and no person can breach it by normal means. But Shinra is planning something crazy to destroy it." Yuffie Kisaragi, the hyperactive materia hunter who had slipped in and out of their journey, returned to her ancestral homeland of Wood, a beautiful eastern nation of pagodas and cherry blossoms that had lost its pride and power after a devastating war with Shinra. The Turks were there, relaxing in the local taverns, but Yuffie had a more personal battle to fight. She climbed the high pagoda of the five mighty gods, confronting her father, Godo Kisaragi. "Wutai doesn't have to be a tourist trap, Dad," Yuffie yelled, her giant shuriken spinning. "We can't just hide from the world. We have to fight for what we believe in, even if it's scary. Go, Yuffie, restore Wutai's honor, save the planet." She was not dead, but lived in a state of eternal, agonizing guilt for allowing Hojo to use her unborn child as a test subject for the Jenova experiments. "Vincent," her spectral voice whispered in the damp cave. Is Sephiroth still alive? What has he become? But I will put an end to his suffering. For you, for the world." Rufus Shinra, desperate to destroy Meteor before it could strike the planet, had devised a high-stakes plan. Gather the 4 huge materia, massive, highly concentrated blocks of Mako energy, from across the world, load them into a space rocket, and ram it directly into the approaching star. "It's a suicide plan," Bugenhagen warned them over the Highwind's communication terminal. "Huge materia is a natural treasure of the planet, containing centuries of wisdom and spiritual energy. If they destroy it, they will destroy the planet's natural ability to heal itself. We must stop them." First, they raced to MT. Coral, where a runaway Shinra steam train loaded with a huge materia was barreling toward North Coral. Cloud and Barrett boarded the train, fighting their way through waves of soldiers to reach the locomotive, successfully pulling the brakes just yards before it could crush the shantytown below. Next, they defended Fort Condor, a high mountain sanctuary where a giant condor nested atop a Mako reactor. Shinra forces launched a massive ground assault, but Cloud led the local resistance forces in a strategic defense, securing the second huge materia as the condor's egg hatched into a brilliant, fiery phoenix. The third hunt took them to the underwater docks of Junon, where they engaged in a high-speed submarine battle, torpedoing a Shinra sub to recover the third crystal from the ocean depths. Finally, they reached Rocket Town. Rocket No. 26 was being prepared for launch, its automated systems already locked. Cloud, Sid, and Shira boarded the rocket to retrieve the final huge materia, but the launch sequence was triggered. The rocket roared to life, shooting into the upper atmosphere with a spectacular plume of fire. High above the blue sphere of the planet, Sid managed to bypass the cargo locks, securing the huge materia. An escape pod carried them back to Earth safely just as the automated rocket collided with Meteor, resulting in a massive, useless explosion that did nothing to stop the star's slow, agonizing descent. The final act of the tragedy was unfolding in Midgar. Diamond Weapon, a towering colossus of silver armor and burning blue energy, marched toward the city. Rufus Shinra ordered the Sister Ray, the giant Mako cannon, to be moved from Junon to Midgar, powered by the city's entire grid of 8 Mako reactors, to blast Sephiroth's barrier at the northern crater. But Diamond Weapon attacked first. It unleashed a devastating barrage of energy spikes that tore through the upper plate of Midgar. One of the spikes pierced the executive suite of the Shinra building, triggering a massive explosion that claimed the life of Rufus Shinra. In the chaos, Heidegger and Scarlet were crushed, and the leadership of the corporation fell into the hands of the mad head scientist, Professor Hojo. "He's lost his mind," Reeve, controlling Kate Sith, announced over the Highwind speakers. "Hojo has taken control of the Sister Ray. He's trying to fire it continuously to send all of the city's Mako directly to Sephiroth in the northern crater. He wants to help his son become a god." The scientist looked at them, his eyes wild with a manic, unholy glee, his skin already turning a sickly shade of gray. "Ha, do you think you can stop me?" Hojo laughed, raising a syringe filled with glowing purple fluid. "Sephiroth is my creation, my own flesh and blood. I will give him all the energy he needs to consume this world." His body began to warp, his skin tearing as he transformed into a towering, multi-limbed monstrosity of mutated flesh and mechanical claws. The battle was frantic and brutal. Cloud's Buster Sword sliced through Hojo's mutated limbs, while Vincent unleashed his monstrous, demonic transformations to tear the scientist's flesh apart. With one final, roaring strike, Cloud drove his sword through Hojo's primary core, ending the mad scientist's experiments once and for all. Though Hojo was defeated, the automated launch sequence of the Sister Ray could not be stopped. With a deafening, metallic roar that shook the very foundations of the earth, the giant cannon fired. A massive beam of pure, brilliant white Mako energy erupted from the barrel, tearing through the clouds and streaking across the ocean toward the northern crater. The beam struck Diamond Weapon, vaporizing the Colossus in an instant. It continued onward, striking the massive energy barrier surrounding the northern crater and shattering it like glass. The Shinra building, weakened by the constant vibrations and explosions, collapsed in a spectacular mountain of steel and concrete. The reign of the Shinra Electric Power Company was officially over, its corporate greed ending in ruin. "We have to rebuild," Reeve said, his Kate Sith toy looking out over the smoking ruins of the city. "But first, you have to stop Sephiroth. Go." "The path is clear." The northern crater was a massive, yawning wound in the planet's crust, a silent valley of ice, crystal, and glowing emerald energy. Here, the lifestream bubbled up in spectacular, silent rivers, spiraling toward the dark abyss below. The party descended into the depths of the crater, their boots clicking against the ancient, frozen stone. They fought through hordes of mutated beasts and the terrifying, liquid remnants of Jenova. At the bottom of the abyss, they found Sephiroth. He lay suspended in a massive cocoon of pure, crystallized materia, his form glowing with the immense energy he had absorbed from the lifestream. Suddenly, the cocoon cracked. The final pure form of the alien parasite, Jenova synthesis, emerged, its grotesque, angelic form blocking their path. "This is the end of the line, Jenova," Cloud yelled, raising his Buster Sword. The battle was a whirlwind of steel, magic, and blood. Working together as a single, unbroken unit, the party tore the alien parasite apart, severing its connection to the planet once and for all. With a deafening shriek, Jenova dissolved into a cloud of glowing green ash, leaving the cocoon open. The final confrontation had begun. Final part, one-winged angel battle. It was a yawning, gravity-warping throat, where the planet's bleeding wind howled in a deafening, metallic pitch. The air was so dense with raw, unfiltered Mako that every breath tasted of cold copper and scorched ozone, burning the throat and stinging the eyes. Below, the lifestream did not flow. It boiled, a violent emerald-green maelstrom that cast long, sickly shadows up the jagged crystalline walls. As the remnants of Jenova synthesis dissolved into a foul, black mist, the massive cocoon of crystallized materia at the center of the abyss began to fracture. It did not crack cleanly. It split with the agonizing screech of tearing iron. From the ruptured shell, Sephiroth's consciousness did not simply step forth, it reshaped the physical world. The ground beneath the party's boots buckled and liquefied. Out of the glowing green depths rose a towering biological cathedral of bone, pulsating flesh, and petrified stone. This was Bizarro Sephiroth. It was a grotesque, multi-layered colossus that dominated the entire cavern, its core a burning furnace of white-hot Mako. "Spread out!" Cloud screamed, his voice barely carrying over the roar of the machinery of flesh. "If we stay together, he'll crush us in one sweep." Barret and Sid took the high ground, their weapons roaring as they targeted the beast's towering, skeletal head, while Tifa, Yuffie, and Vincent launched a brutal, coordinated assault on the pulsating core. The physical toll was immediate and devastating. The air was thick with flying splinters of crystal and shards of bone. A massive, swinging tentacle caught Barret square in the chest, sending him crashing into the rock wall with a sickening crack of ribs. Tifa was thrown backward, her gloves stained with her own blood as her fist struck calcified armor that felt as hard as solid iron. Cloud drove forward, his muscles screaming under the pressure of the Mako-enhanced gravity. He leaped from one shifting stone platform to another, his buster sword ringing like a bell as he parried the slashing, blade-like wings of the monstrosity. With a raw, guttural cry, he channeled the last of his physical strength, driving the broad blade deep into the core. The Titan shuddered. The pulsating flesh turned a dull, ash-gray, and with a final, earth-shaking groan, the cathedral of bone collapsed inward, sliding into the boiling emerald sea below. But there was no time to breathe. The violent green light of the lifestream suddenly died, plunged into an absolute suffocating darkness. The roaring of the wind ceased. A chilling, unnatural silence fell over the crater, a silence so profound that the party could hear the frantic, ragged beating of their own hearts. Then, the auditory hallucination began. It started as a low, rhythmic vibration in their skulls, a haunting whisper of Latin chanting that seemed to rise from the very stones. It grew louder, more oppressive, transforming into a booming, celestial choir that vibrated in their bones. Estuans interius ira vehementii. Above them the dark clouds parted, revealing a cold, infinite void of stars. Floating in the center of this cosmic abyss was a being of terrifying, transcendent beauty, Sephiroth. He had shed all remnants of humanity. His skin was a flawless, pearlescent white, his long, silver hair drifting in an unseen wind. His legs were gone. Instead, his lower body was a twisted, magnificent mass of 6 pure white, skeletal wings that gently fanned the darkness. Floating above his head were dual, burning halos of golden Mako energy, inscribed with shifting, complex mathematical formulas of cosmic destruction. But the most terrifying detail was his right side. His arm was gone, replaced by a single, massive, midnight black wing of raw, shifting shadow that pulsed like a living wound. Sephiroth looked down at them. His eyes were cold, vacant, and burning with the absolute, indifferent power of a god. He raised his black wing, and the world warped. Before anyone could move, Sephiroth cast Heartless Angel. A pale, cold light washed over them, and in an instant their vital forces were stripped away. It was not a physical wound. It was a spiritual freezing. Cloud felt his heart stutter, his lungs collapsing as if the very concept of breath had been stolen from him. Barret fell to his knees, vomiting blood, his vision fading to black. Tifa collapsed, her hands clutched over her chest, gasping for air that would not come. They were alive, but only by a single, fragile thread. He's too strong. Sid wheezed, using his spear as a crutch, his legs shaking violently. Get up, Cloud snarled, his vision swimming with red. He dragged himself to his feet, using the buster sword to support his weight. We didn't come this far to die in the dark. He raised his hands, and the math on his golden halos flared. The vision of the crater vanished. Suddenly they were floating in the cold, silent depths of the solar system. In the distance, a small, dark comet appeared, streaking through the cosmos. This was Supernova. They watched in mute, helpless horror as the comet slammed into Pluto, shattering the frozen planet into a cloud of glittering ice. The cosmic entity of destruction did not stop. It tore through the rings of Saturn, obliterated the gas giant Jupiter, and plunged directly into the heart of the sun. The sun did not just flare, it swelled, turning a violent, blinding blue-white. A massive, expanding wall of nuclear fire and stellar radiation rushed toward them, vaporizing everything in its path. The psychological and physical terror of the attack was absolute. Even as an illusion, the sheer psychic force of the dying star burned their minds and blistered their skin. The blinding, white-hot light filled their vision, and a deafening, roaring heat screamed in their ears, threatening to turn their bones to ash. They felt themselves disintegrating, their very souls being torn apart by the gravity of a dying world. When the light finally faded, they were back in the dark crater. The party lay scattered across the stone, bleeding from their eyes and ears, their armor melted and their weapons chipped. They were broken, physically and mentally, hovering on the very brink of death. Sephiroth descended slowly, his black wing raised to deliver the final, mercy-killing blow. But Cloud was already moving. He did not stand. He dragged himself forward, his eyes burning with a desperate, manic intensity. He remembered Nibelheim. He remembered Zack's blood on the rainy grass. He remembered Aerith's peaceful face sinking into the glowing water of the lake. "This is for them," Cloud roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated human defiance. He channeled the raw, pure essence of his reclaimed self, his spirit igniting with a brilliant, blue-white light. He leaped, his buster sword swinging with a force that shattered the sound barrier, clashing against Sephiroth's shadow wing. The force of the impact created a vacuum, clearing the fog from the crater. Sephiroth's eyes widened in genuine shock as the human puppet broke through his divine defenses. Cloud swung again and again, his friends dragging themselves up to join the desperate final assault. Barrett's gun arm roared, Tifa's fist struck with the weight of her grief, and Cid's spear drove deep into the angelic wings. With one final, screaming strike, Cloud drove the buster sword through safer Sephiroth's chest. The seraph shrieked, a sound of high-pitched alien agony. His white wings shattered into glittering shards of glass, and his body began to dissolve into a violent, expanding column of green and white light. But as Sephiroth's physical form disintegrated, Cloud's consciousness was suddenly seized, yanked violently out of his body. He was falling through a tunnel of pure, liquid green light. He landed in a vast, weightless psychic void within the lifestream itself. Standing across from him in the green mist was the pure, uncorrupted spirit of Sephiroth. He held the legendary Masamune, his cat-like green eyes fixed on Cloud with a predatory, eternal hatred. This was the final, absolute duel. There were no friends to help him, no armor to protect him. It was a battle of pure wills. Sephiroth lunged, the Masamune slicing through the green light with blinding speed. But Cloud did not dodge. He stood his ground, his mind completely still, his heart empty of fear. He drew the buster sword back, his spirit igniting with the ultimate expression of his martial will. Omnislash. Cloud vanished, becoming a streak of pure, brilliant white light. 1. The buster sword clashed against the Masamune, sending a shockwave through the spiritual void. 2, 3, 4. Cloud struck from the left, the right, the sky, his blade moving faster than the human eye could track, leaving trails of white light in the green mist. 5, 6, 7. Sephiroth desperately parried, but the sheer, relentless kinetic fury of the strikes drove him back, his spiritual armor cracking. 8, 9, 10. The strikes grew faster, a dizzying dance of steel and spirit. Cloud was channeling every memory, every promise, every ounce of love and grief he had ever felt. 11, 12, 13, 14. The Masamune began to bend, its legendary steel screaming under the pressure. With a final, roaring spin, Cloud ascended into the sky of the void, holding the buster sword with both hands. 15. Cloud descended like a falling star, bringing the heavy blade down in a vertical cleave. The strike was absolute. It split the Masamune in two, the shards dissolving into the mist and cut directly through Sephiroth's soul. Sephiroth froze. His cat-like green eyes opened wide, the cold hatred suddenly replaced by a quiet, empty shock. His spirit began to bleed white light from a dozen deep gashes. With a soft, final sigh, his form shattered into a million glittering particles, swept away by the eternal currents of the life stream. Cloud opened his eyes. He was back in his physical body, lying on the stone floor of the collapsing crater. Tifa was kneeling beside him, her hands trembling as she pulled him to his feet. "We have to go." "Now," Sid screamed, the Highwind hovering perilously close to the crumbling ledge of the crater. They scrambled onto the airship's deck just as the northern crater collapsed entirely, swallowed by a massive, violent eruption of the life stream. But as they soared into the sky, the true nightmare revealed itself. Meteor had reached the upper atmosphere. The burning red star was so close that it filled the entire sky, its gravity pulling the plates of Midgar apart. The friction of its descent turned the air into a furnace, the clouds burning like paper as the sky turned a terrifying, apocalyptic orange. The green sphere of Holy erupted from the earth, rising to meet the star, but it was too late. The corruption and hatred of humanity had weakened the planet's natural flow, and Holy was buckling under the crushing weight of the red star, its white light beginning to flicker and fade. It's not enough," Tifa whispered, her hand gripping Cloud's arm as they watched the end of the world. But then Cloud felt a warm, gentle presence in the wind. He looked down at the earth. From the mountains, the valleys, the deserts, and the oceans, millions of glowing, emerald-green rivers of light began to rise. It was the life stream. It was not a violent flood, but a gentle, overwhelming wave of life, guided by a single, loving consciousness from within the heart of the planet. The spirits of the dead, the memories of the living, and the pure, raw love of the planet rose into the burning sky. The life stream wrapped around the massive red star, merging with the white light of Holy. For a single, breathless second, the world went completely silent. Then a brilliant, blinding flash of absolute white light filled the universe, vaporizing Meteor in a silent display of ultimate grace and saving the planet from the brink of oblivion. 500 years later, the red wind of the canyon blew softly. A great red-furred beast, Nanaki, now ancient and wise, ran along the high stone cliffs overlooking the ruins of Midgar. Beside him ran two young cubs, their paws kicking up the dusty, wild earth. They reached the edge of the cliff, looking down. The once mighty steel metropolis of Midgar was gone, its Mako draining plates buried beneath a vast, breathtaking forest of towering green trees, blooming wild flowers, and rushing, crystal-clear rivers. Nature had reclaimed the concrete, and the rusted reactors were covered in thick green moss, a silent, beautiful monument to a forgotten age of greed. The planet was alive. The birds sang in the clean, sweet air, and as the golden sun began to rise over the green hills, Nanaki threw his head back, his proud howl echoing across the valley, showing that life had found a way to continue.